Three, two, one, and we're live. Thanks again for tuning in to another episode of the Village Made Podcast. My name is Maveo Hemoli, and today we got an exciting podcast for you. Exciting guest, and
Don't lie, I'm not exciting.
so today's guest is Cameron Van Wagoner. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Good job.
Sorry if I messed that up, but I'm excited. Just because in sharing this podcast, there's a different perspective and a perspective that we have because, I mean, I guess we'll just get into his story, Cameron. And so thank you for, man, it's been, a couple of times that we've scheduled and rescheduled, but at the end of the day, I appreciate you coming out and, still wanting to do this.
Nah, man. I mean, I appreciate you. I appreciate what you do. So, mahalo.
All right. So where were you born and raised? Let's start with that.
I was born in Provo, Utah. And I spent my life there until I was 19 years old.
Okay.
So,
And then for your name, can you go over
my name.
who named you?
Yeah.
Is there a significance or if there's meaning to your name?
I mean, there is. So my full name is Cameron DeLos Van Wagoner. For the first name, my parents, I mean, it's not really like naming someone after someone. I guess it happens in a lot of times in Palangi culture, but sometimes they're just like, yeah, we like this. There you go. Like, child, there's your name.
Yeah.
With my parents, my mom only ever thought she would have 4 kids. And and I'm the 5th, right? So I'm the 5th of 6. They ended up having 2 more than what she thought she would. But when my parents got married or whatever, they're like, oh, what kind of names? My dad had like one name in particular, which is my sister's name, because of just a friend he had in Scotland. And he was just absolutely in love with that. It was actually a little girl, and she was the greatest little girl in the world. So my sister is kind of named after her. But the rest of my brothers, they have their first names, at least, are all just names that my parents both liked. And then the middle names have some sort of significance, like named after a family member or last name or whatever. And then our last name is Van Wagoner. So my first name, my mom actually didn't come up with a name for me because she had always had 4 names, or they had always had 4 names. And so I went home from the hospital without a name, which isn't uncommon in a lot of cultures. Like some cultures are wait, I think like a year sometimes before naming a child. But and then she named me Cameron, which is, to her at the time, she there wasn't any particular reason. It just sounded right. But I found it interesting that she named me that because her mother, I guess her grandparents came from Scotland to Canada, and then her mother came from Canada to the States. But her mother, it was a Robertson from the clan Robertson, and she was very, very, very big into Scottish heritage. And when I was a kid, my grandmother would take me to all the Scottish festivals. She's like, you're either going to learn to play the bagpipes or the snare drum. And I learned to play the drum. And my grandma really kind of taught me what, I guess, a culture is, or culture is when we think about, our more generic forms of culture, I guess, or traditional forms of culture. And then I learned that my name was Scottish. Cameron is an old Scottish king's name. And so I was like, oh, awesome. Like my dad has Scottish in him too. So altogether I'm, between a third and a half Scottish, if you get the blood quantums or whatever, or blood quantities. So my mom, later in life, when I got really into my Scottish heritage through my grandma and just my dad as well. My dad lived in Scotland for a little while, and his mother is a Munro, which is another Scottish clan. And so he was also very into his Scottish heritage. I guess she's like, I knew your name felt right, and I knew that was the name you should have. I just didn't know why. But now we know why, because I'm very, very, I guess, drawn to my Scottish heritage and my Scottish culture. And I'm glad that I have a Scottish name, because the rest of my names aren't Scottish. So that's kind of my first name, Cameron. And then DeLos, we actually don't know where that's from. So my great grandfather was Dean DeLoss. He was a cowboy out here in Utah. He just grew up out where Lehigh is now. They used to bring in wild Mustangs off the range and do all kinds of stuff with that. And we don't know where his name's from. So we speculate, or it could either be like the Spanish de los, like from the or of the, or it would be Delos, I guess I don't know how exactly you'd pronounce it, but it's an island in Greece that Apollo and Artemis are said to be from. And so we don't know exactly which it is. If it was, when I get to my last name, you'll realize why Delos would be repetitive, meaning from the or of the, because my last name actually has that as a part of my last name. But yeah, my middle name, I'm just like, hey, it's a Greek island. I just kind of stick with that to avoid the repetitiveness of it being repeated in my last name, because my last name is Van Wagoner, which is 2 words. The story behind that last name is I had ancestors from Gelderland, and I probably said that horribly wrong, in Dutch, and they came from the Netherlands. And the tradition in the Netherlands was your last name was your father's name with the word sen at the end, right? So my ancestor was Garrett Gerritsen because his father's name was Garrett as well. And so when you look at my family tree, and I love the Dutch for all of the records that they kept, because I can trace my Dutch ancestry back to like the 1400s. But yeah, it's interesting because as you follow the line, you see like Garrett Gerritsen, Garrett Gerritsen, Garrett Gerritsen, Garrett Johnson, John Gerritsen, Garrett, like, it's like, oh, they threw a John in there or something like that. But when they came to, so the people from Wageningen in the state of Gelderland, when they came to the States, they were it was in like the early 1600s, so the colonies, I guess, or whatever. When they came over to the Americas, they stopped taking their father's name really, and that family, or Garrett Gerritsen's family, took the name von Wageningen. Von meaning from, or Van meaning from. So any Dutch or German name, if it has Van or Von in front of it, it means from. And then Wageningen was the town that they were from. And so they had that last name for as long as the Dutch colonies were kind of around. But when everything kind of melded and the British took more control and the people were, I guess, the revolution happened and America happened, right? There were 2 sons of this family, and my ancestor's name was John, and he Americanized his name. Instead of being Van Wageningen, he changed it to Van Wagoner. And then there was another son who took the name Wagenin, or Van Wagenin. So Van Wagoner and Van Wagenin are the same family that started back on the East Coast. But a lot of those descendants eventually converted to Mormonism and then came across the plains with that pioneer movement. And so I guess people ask me, like, what's your name? Like, I'm a Scottish Dutch boy with either some Greek or some Spanish in the middle, but we don't really know.
Dang, that's interesting. And so, I mean, this is the first time on the podcast because usually we have Polynesian names or, different stuff. And so, but hold on tight, we'll get to, why I asked Cameron to be on. And so, because that's a cool perspective as well, that we can get a perspective from you that is not Polynesian. And so, I guess when you were growing up, what was childhood like for you growing up in the streets of Provo?
The streets of Provo. Actually, I grew up on kind of West Center in Provo, Utah, down by the lake. For anyone who's familiar with the Provo, Utah area, I grew up on a small farm lot of about 4 acres, I think is what we have. And my childhood consisted of dirt and sticks, and my dad
playing around in the outdoors.
Outside. We were always outside. Very outdoorsy. My dad, we gardened. We had gardens that were a couple acres big, you know what I mean? Like, but eventually my dad has a landscaping business, or had one, and he's still a gardener, as he calls it, or a landscaper. And so, just for story's sake, I'm not trying to get anyone thrown in jail, but I started working for my dad when I was 9 years old. So that's when he started taking me on jobs and doing rock work, doing, planting trees, mowing lawns. Just pretty much anything that has to do with outside.
So in Polynesian terms, he's yate.
Yeah. So
Basically,
I
you
got
were
thrown. I
yating?
got thrown in the yate truck when I was 9 years old, like a lot of
Just
the other
like, yeah.
kids. Yeah. I guess. Well, yeah. My dad had a. I mean, I love my dad. Probably, my parents. I love them more than anything in the world. But when I became close with Polynesians, particularly Tongans, there's kind of this joke that like, hey, we get along so well because we were all raised on top ramen. Because we were really poor growing up, and so like just cases of ramen was the go-to.
Right?
Yeah, the go-to. If we were feeling fancy, we'd have some mac and cheese, but it was mostly ramen. And then how do you say this? My dad had a very traditional sense of discipline, like
Polynesian.
a lot of my other Polynesian friends' fathers, and so that was kind of the joke, like, oh, we got along because, like, if I would tell stories about being disciplined, and I would think it's funny, and the Polynesians think it's funny, but then the kid who's never been beat before is like, oh my goodness, are you okay? Like, but yeah. So that, in some ways, like I don't think I grew up like a Polynesian. Like I grew up in a white Western culture that was more of your, I have some cowboy heritage or ancestry, and then farm. I grew up around a lot of farms, spent a lot of time on horseback and four-wheelers and guns and redneck stuff like that. So played football through middle school and high school, spent a lot of time camping, snowboarding, a lot of time working. Mm-hmm. But yeah, that was pretty much childhood.
Dang. Very much similar, to Polynesians, like you were talking about. So for you, what were some of was education important growing up, and what were some of the things taught in the home, for you maybe stuck or didn't stick? Or...
So I didn't know my dad went to college until I think I went to college. But my mom worked at UVU, so Utah Valley University. She was always in school. Like when I was a kid, she was finishing up her bachelor's, got her master's when I was a kid. She got her doctorate. When was that? Probably like when I was on a mission. I served a mission, but I served in an LDS mission, a proselyting mission for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. So for education for my mom was huge,
right?
And she kind of like homeschooled us. And so when I went into kindergarten, they had these little books that were like one sentence and 10 pages, and you're supposed to read one book a day. But I had been reading those books because she taught me how to read really young. I had been reading those books for like 2 years at the time.
Wow. And
I hated the work. I thought it was pointless because it was just easy. And I was like, man, I'm better than this, my humble self. And so what my mom ended up doing is asking the teacher, like she would send me home with 10 books, but then I was irritated because I didn't want to have to read 10 books when all the other kids had to read one. And then she's like, okay, well, maybe we'll move them up a grade. And the principal of the elementary school just didn't want that to happen for whatever reason. I don't really remember. I was like 5 at the time or whatever. But this is what I think happened is like school was easy for me in kindergarten and first grade and into second grade that I kind of just didn't try. And so in third grade, I got put in special education, not because I couldn't do it, but just because I screwed around so much. Right. So I wasn't the greatest student. And then when I got into high school, like I had to have a 2.0 GPA to play football. Right. And so I was like, I'm just going to school to play football. So despite my mom's efforts in pushing me and everything, I didn't do well in school. I did okay in elementary school. Like I got back into it in the later years, but like in high school, I think I graduated like at 2.8 or something. And then it wasn't until I was kind of planning on going to college, but it was like, oh, maybe I'll go play football somewhere just to play football if whatever happens. Like I wasn't an amazing football player, but I could have probably gone to like a D2 school or something, right? But my mission president, so I served a mission in Tonga. I'm kind of jumping ahead in my whole experience with Tonga or whatnot. But my mission president, he is a very strong, very strict Tongan man. He was like, "Where are you gonna go to school?" I was like, "Oh, I might go back and might go to school." I was like, "Nah, apply to BYU Hawaii." I was like, "Okay," so I applied.
Who was the mission president?
Elder Tukuafu.
Okay.
Well, President Tukuafu, and then during my mission with him, he was made the Area 70, so the area authority of all of Tonga, and he got the title Elder Tukuafu. So
Cool.
So yeah, he's awesome. I love him. But yeah, so he pushed me, and then eventually I got accepted into BYU Hawaii, and then they gave me a scholarship. I guess they do this at all the BYUs, but they'll give you a scholarship according to your GPA. And I was like, wait, getting good grades could save me $3,000 this month. And so during college, I actually ended up graduating with, what is it, magna cum laude or something? Okay. I don't remember. I was like, why are these words on my card? Like when we were walking for graduation, and I didn't know what it was until afterwards, and someone else told me, oh, it's because you graduated with honors. I was like, oh, for real? I graduated like a 3.8 something. Yeah. But I didn't do it because like I was an amazing student. I was just like, yeah, I don't want to pay $3,000. I was like, yeah, this free school thing's a lot better than the expensive school thing. So, right. But after all of that, my mom, so I was the first, I guess all of us kids kind of grew up with that more. I mean, we grew up on a farm and spending time outside, so we didn't really do well in a classroom. Yeah. And I was the first one to get my bachelor's degree. And then it was a big thing for my mom. Like my mom was elated because one of her kids had finally like taken to academia. But I value my education a lot. Like I don't agree with the education system in a lot of ways, but my education for the experiences I gain and the connections and also just the eye-opening things that you learn, to me, it's invaluable. Right. Yeah.
You want to talk about the first time that you encountered or had I guess whether you lived with Tongans or even going to Tonga, on that that mission? Was it a mission or something? But
yeah. So growing up, for my early childhood, there were just nothing but fields around me. As far as you could look south, on the north side of Center Street, they had already built some neighborhoods, but all of the adjacent properties to our little farm lot was just cornfields or alfalfa fields or whatever they were growing. But then they built, pretty much a lot of the farmers had sold out. So to the east side of my property, on our east property line and on our back property line, they had built neighborhoods and houses. And so we had a road going out the back of our property and then hooking up to where the neighborhood started. And the house, right next to our property line, so sharing property lines, there was a family from Hawaii that moved in there. And they had a son that was my age. And eventually, me and his name was Kamana'o. I don't know if it's appropriate to say names or whatever, but me and Kamana'o got pretty close as friends, so really close. And I really enjoyed spending time at their with him and his family. His dad is a musician. His mom would, read us the old Hawaiian ghost stories and like she had different activities for us during the summer, and she was just a great mother. And so I spent a lot of time with him and got kind of acquainted with Polynesian culture. And then they had other Polynesian friends and a Samoan family in the neighborhood. And, I got close, I became acquainted with them, I guess, and their son was our age as well. And then just Asian families, because they're Hawaiian, but Hawaiian Asian mix. And so there's a lot of Asian influence in there as well. And they really, I guess, exposed me to that Polynesian culture, which was great. And I loved it. And yeah, like I was saying earlier, they let me go on vacation with them or go on a part of a vacation with them to Hawaii, and got me addicted to Hawaii as a 15-year-old kid. And but when we started high school, there was another family from Hawaii that moved up to not necessarily our neighborhood, but close to our neighborhood, and we went to the same high school. And it was a Tongan family, right? And so because they were from Hawaii and these guys are from Hawaii, or Kamana'o was from Hawaii, they kind of clicked up and we started hanging out with each other. and it was this Tongan family from Hawaii. And so I was called. I learned what the word hanai was with Kamanao and his family. Like one day, his mom walked into the room, we were playing video games or whatever, and she's just like, "Oh, Cameron, my hanai son," which is probably telling me like, "Little white boy, you need to leave now. Like you're here too much." But so I went from being like kind of like a hanai kid to hanging out with these Tongan kids a whole lot. And then I kind of have this joke like Polynesians love adopting stray white kids or just anything, like they're just big into pushiaki, like
Right.
So I became this kind of little pushiaki to this Tongan family. Spent a lot of nights over there, spent a lot of time with them, got along with them great, appreciated the sense of humor, appreciated the more communal sense of living. And I really, between them and my experience with like other Polynesians, and then there's also like in Utah, I feel like especially in Utah, there's kind of like this, like Tongans are like enamored because you have like movies like The Other Side of Heaven or whatever. So I had seen The Other Side of Heaven a ton of times when I was a younger kid, and I kind of I always dreamed of like being a missionary in Tonga and having all those experiences and learning Tongan and getting a Tongan name and like I was like the wannabe Tongan kid at the school, which I mean I probably was. Like at the time I was still like I was very proud of my Scottish heritage. I was very proud of my Palangi self. But at the same time I loved the Polynesian culture and spending time with them. And so eventually the first time I went to Tonga, this girl came up to me in school and she's like rubbing it in my face. She's like, "I'm gonna go to Tonga," and blah blah. Like just like, and we had a computer class together. And I was like, "How are you gonna go to Tonga?" I was like, she's like, "Oh look," and we go into the computer class and she pulled up this like website, and it's pretty much like those like send your privileged little white kid on this trip and so they can feel good about themselves as they build something that's like not actually gonna benefit the community kind of thing. I didn't know that at the time, but come to find out that's pretty much what it is. So it's one of those like humanitarian trips,
Right.
where you pretty much pay money to go work on a construction project in another country. And I looked at it and like she's like, "Look," and blah blah blah, and looking at the website. So I pulled up the website too, and there was one spot left on the trip to go to Tonga. And I was just like, I looked at her, I was like, "I'm gonna go too." And she's like, "Okay, whatever." But I mean, we didn't grow up with a lot of money. And the trip was like $2,500, which,
Wow. Yeah.
I mean, now it doesn't seem like a lot. Well, I mean, it still seems like a lot, but at the time it was like an impossible sum of money for like I think I was 16, 17 at the time. But I was like, whatever, I'm gonna go. So this was the first time I was really like proactive about something aside from football, I guess. So I like got the contact information for them. I emailed them. I was like, "Hey, look, I don't have the money, but when like this was like in February, like next month when the snow melts, I can start mowing lawns and I can have the money to you before July when the trip goes. It's like, can you just please save that spot for me?" And they're like, "Yeah, okay, cool." And so I was really very appreciative of that because like they set up kind of like this payment plan.
Yeah.
And so between, working for my dad and mowing lawns, and then eventually he probably paid the rest. Oh, he paid the rest of it. He's like, "You know what, just go." So I went to Tonga for 2 weeks. It was cool. Like I loved it. I relished it. I really did. I loved it. We worked at a little elementary school in Havelu, the Havelu GPS government primary school. And we played with the kids during all of their breaks, and we went to the different church activities around, and like it was just great. It was a great experience. And I kind of left that and I went back home, and like my Tongan family back home, they're like, "You went to," like, 'cause I didn't tell anybody. Right. Like I was just, I don't know, maybe it's a bad thing, but I don't really announce stuff to people that much. But like, they're like, "Yeah, you went to whatever, like you went to Tonga, cool, whatever." They ended up moving from Provo, so they moved up to like Saratoga Springs, and I would still drive out and hang out with them, like, every other weekend or whatnot. But it kind of got to the point where I was finishing high school and I was kind of like getting closer to my own roots, I guess. And I was getting a lot more into Western stuff. Like I was riding horses a lot more. I went down to New Mexico to work on this little ranch program. I went up, you know, and I was just getting more into what I felt like was my ancestry. And I kind of let go of my desire to go serve a mission in Tonga. Like I was like, you know what, like I went to Tonga, I experienced that. I mean, not 2 weeks is a lot more different than 2 years, but I was like, you know, that was a great experience, but now I'm going to just focus on doing what I think I should do. And kind of like, yeah, I still want, so I still want to go to Tonga, but I'm just not going to worry about it anymore. So actually I kind of like said this prayer because like there's a hymn, in the churches, I'll go where you want me to go. And I was like listening to that hymn one day and I was like, you know what, like you're right. Like, so I kind of said this prayer. I was like, look, God, you know, I want to go to Tonga, but I'll go where you want me to go. And I just kind of let go of the whole, you know, want to be Tongan thing. Right. And then, so I put in my application to go on a mission, came back a couple weeks later. I was down in New Mexico, so I didn't actually open it myself. And for anybody who's familiar with Mormon culture, there's this big deal when you open it in front of your whole family. I wasn't there for that. They just called me on the phone and they all opened it up together. Like my friends went over there and my family was there, but I wasn't there. And they opened it up and my mom, as she was reading it, she was like, oh, sorry about that. She was like, whatever, blah, 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 you have been called to serve in the, and she paused. And I was just like, don't mess with me, because I knew she would like say Tonga like that to play a trick on me or something. But then she tried pronounce, like, instead of saying Tonga, she went nuku. And as soon as I heard nuke, I was like, that's nukolofa Tonga. Like I was just like, and I was in a truck and like with the, you know, the speaker system in the truck. And I just started freaking out and I was like, just like up out of my chair, like in the truck, like punching the roof. And I'm the only kid from Utah. I'm the only Mormon kid there and no one else knows what's going on. They're all the other ranch hands are sitting on the porch. There's probably like 10 kids there, like just sitting on the porch, you know, smoking or whatever. And they're just like, is he okay? What's that guy? Like, it's like, what's wrong with that guy? So it was interesting because I felt like when I let go of it, I was given exactly what I wanted. So like I went to Tonga, I was able to learn the language. I was able to, I mean, I guess my nickname now, Kona, was from, they took Van Wagoner and they didn't like that it was, well, in Tonga, they would either, some people would say Elta Ven or they would say Elta Wakona. And so eventually everyone just started calling me Wakona, which eventually showed it to Kona. And so I kind of got this little Tongan nickname. And it was amazing. Like I loved it. I was in Ha'apai, Vava'u, Niua, Tonga Tapu. It was just a great experience. I wouldn't trade it for anything. And just by letting go of everything I wanted or I thought I wanted, I was given that, but much more. Right. So then I left. Like I finished my mission. Like I said, my mission president was like, "Hey, you need to go apply for school." Yeah. I applied to BYU Hawaii. I was like, "Yeah, I got like a 2-point-something GPA," and they said you need like a 3.5 to get in. So like I just didn't think anything more of it. I went home. I think I was home about a month, and I got an email saying, "Hey, you need to finish your application. Like we have an incomplete application for you." I was like, "Oh, okay, whatever." And I just had to go in and like click submit or whatever. Like right. I thought I had done it, but this whole time I actually hadn't submitted the application. And then the day after I submit my application, I got my acceptance letter back. Wow. So I got accepted to BYU Hawaii, which is like, I was like, well, this kind of screws up all these plans I don't have. Like, so I was home from Tonga about 2 months and I was in Utah. I came home September and in like October, it was getting really cold. And at this point, the family I had kind of grown up with or got really close to in high school, they had gone back to Hawaii. And so I called up their dad and I was like, "Hey, I just wanted to get out of Utah. Like I was just ta'ilata. I was like, man, I need to go to an island. Like, so I was like, hey, and he has a yate company down there doing rock walls and everything. And I was like, hey, do you have any jobs? He's like, not really, but come. I was like, okay, sweet. Like, and so I hopped on a plane. I think I called him like on Tuesday or Wednesday. I hopped on a plane that Friday, went down to Hawaii. and just kind of hung out and worked for a couple months before starting school at BYU Hawaii. And so I started school, and I was like, I was like, what do I want to do for a living? And I guess my motivation is like, I wanted to help people realize their potential.
Yeah.
And so I decided that I was going to be a physics teacher. So I started my education like as secondary education. And I was like, you know what, like I've heard, because my aunt's a rodeo cowgirl, and she actually worked on lanai or lanai, however you want to say it, on some horse stuff out there. And she was up at Waimea a lot on the Big Island. And she's like, you're gonna love Hawaii because it has all your island stuff and it has like all your ranches. And I was like, Hawaii has ranches? And she's like, yeah. I was like, awesome. Like, so my whole plan was like, you know what, I'm gonna be a physics teacher because people really need math and science teachers. And then I'm gonna go live on like Molokai and just like be like
the ranch.
Yeah, just like be a cowboy during the summer and be a teacher during the school year. That's kind of thing. And so that was like the plan, right? And I was there, so I didn't really have any. I was like, yeah, it'd be great to go back and visit Tonga sometime, whatever. But I didn't really have any intention or plans of going back. But I took a Hawaiian studies class, which is required to be a teacher in Hawaii. That was my first semester. And then I also took a Tongan language class to get credit for learning Tongan, right? But I have to take the whole class at BYU Hawaii. I think at BYU Provo, you just take a test. But for me, they wanted me to take the advanced course. And if I passed the advanced course, I would
get the credit, yeah.
I would get all the credit, like 15 credits or something for learning the language. So in these classes, the Hawaiian studies class, I really appreciated that professor. I appreciated all my professors at BYU Hawaii. BYU Hawaii was a great school for me. But I had a professor, Dr. Kali Fermentes, native Hawaiian guy from Haula, super, super cool. And he called me in. We wrote our midterm papers or whatever. He was like, hey, can I talk to you? And like, he has a very serious demeanor, yeah. Right. Like, and I was just like, oh, freak. Like, so I thought he thought I cheated or like, I thought there was a problem with my paper or something. So I go into his office and I'm like, I promise I didn't cheat. And he's like, no, like it's very apparent in your writing that you have a, like a big passion for the Pacific, or Hawaiian stuff. And I was like, yeah, I grew up with Hawaiians. Like, I'm all for the cause. Like, like make Hawaii sovereign, whatever. Like, he's like, no, but I'm serious. Like, you should really, really consider studying Hawaiian studies or Pacific Island studies. And I was just like, what do you do with a degree in Pacific Island, like Hawaiian studies, Pacific Island studies? Like, that's the kind of degree you get. Like, that cliche, like, oh, I studied English and now I'm working at like Walmart or something. Yeah. You know what I mean? Not that people study English work at Walmart, but like, it sounded like one of those degrees to me. And then my Tongan teacher, she was also a good teacher. She was a lot of fun. And she was constantly like, she's like, you need to go back to Tonga. You need to go back to Tonga. And so eventually, they kept pushing me, and my Hawaiian studies teacher, he knew I was obsessed with voyaging. Because when I served in Tonga, I would go from Vava'u to Niua to hop by, all by boat.
Wow, okay.
And so, I mean, when we went to Niua, I spent 3 days on this boat. And I would get out there. You just get out there when there's no clouds in the sky. It's literally like dark blue, light blue. That's it. And then like this ball of brightness that you can't look at, right? And I was just like, how in the world did like, because I knew they didn't have compasses or modern instrument. I was like, how did people come out here with this like dark blue, light blue and find their way around? Like, because when the sun comes up, you can tell where east is when the sun comes up, but only for like half an hour. After that, it's kind of hard to tell. Like, it's just up there. So he knew I was fascinated by, because I mean, come to find out, like by 400 AD, like they estimate that every single island in the Pacific had been found or inhabited, if it was inhabitable, by Polynesians, right? So this is 1,000 years, like 1,000 years before Columbus had the audacity to leave the side of the coast.
Spain, yeah.
These guys had gone and found every single rock in the biggest ocean in the world. And I was just like, it blew my mind. It was awesome. Like, I was just obsessed with it. And so my Hawaiian studies teacher took us to see the Iosepa, which is the Hawaiian voyaging canoe they have there at PCC next to Bioi, Hawaii. And they're giving the presentation on it, and he just like, I don't know if you knew this, but I was just like, this is awesome. Like, and he comes up behind me, like he's like the little devil, like comes, and I think he was recruiting for his department. Right. I mean, there's like, yeah, we need to get our numbers up or they're gonna axe us, right? But so he's trying to get me to change my major to Pacific Island Studies or Hawaiian Studies. And he comes up behind me, like at the end of the presentation, he's like, you know,
did you like that?
He's like, you know, Pacific Island Studies and Hawaiian Studies get to sail it. And I was just like, oh, frick, I'm sold. Okay, what do I do? Like, so I kind of like, I started, it was the first time I was like, you know, I really want to, like, I want to study this. Like, I grew up loving this kind of stuff. I am very passionate. It would be great to study, but what am I gonna do? Yeah. So that was like a really serious question on my mind. And as I was thinking about that, I remembered a conversation that I had with a guy in Vava'u. So I don't know how, you know, if people are very aware of this, but suicide is a big problem in the Pacific. Yep. I think Pacific Island youth, I'm not quite sure if it's in the Pacific or just, you know, diasporically, have 3 times the suicide rate of the world average.
Wow.
And so when I was and so that's just a small part of it too, because those are the kids who, like, it gets bad enough to kill themselves. But that doesn't include all the kids who are so bored or have nothing to do that they drink and go crash into a tree, you know, driving 80 miles an hour, which happened all the time. Christmas Day, my first area, I think five kids died in Tomololo. One of them, I actually knew his younger brother. And that was everywhere. Like, everywhere I went, we attended funerals of young men. Wow. Because they had either committed suicide, gotten in a fight and been killed in the fight, in the brawl. That happened in Vaini. We went to a funeral in Vaini for that. In Vava'u, while I was in Vava'u, there were, I think I was only there for 3 months, and there were about 3 or 4 deaths.
Crazy.
And I mean, Vava'u has a population of 14,000, like, if you stretch it. Right. To have 3 or 4 deaths, and I think 2 of them were suicide. To have that many deaths in that short of time, not to include every other area I had ever been in had that. Like, when I was in Belehake, a guy my age had committed suicide. Like, so I mean, not to, you know, I talk about it kind of so normally right now, but it was, and it's sad because it's kind of normal in Tonga. Like, it's not uncommon for young men to die all the time. And so this member, I was having dinner with him, or he was a guy in Vava'u. He's actually a deportee, I think, but I mean, he was cool. Like, I loved what he was doing with his kids and the youth and everything. And he had actually gone to Provo High. He grew up in Provo too before he moved back to Tonga. And he asked me, he's like, "Oh, were you a Boy Scout?" And I was like, "Yeah, I mean, I got my eagle when I was like 18. Like, I was what they call a deathbed eagle. Like, hey, if you don't finish this right now, you're not gonna get it." I was like, "Okay, I'll do it." So I mean, I don't know. Like, I wasn't an amazing scout. I mean, I was very outdoorsy, but that was a small part of it. And I wasn't an amazing student or anything. I wasn't an amazing anything, really. But he's like, "Oh, like, that's great. I was in Scouts too when I lived in Provo." And he's like, "You went to Provo High? You're a Bulldog too?" "Yeah, man." Like, it was just, but he's like, "Hey, will you come back to Vava'u and help me start the Boy Scouts here?" And I was like 20 at the time. And I was like, it was my last area. I was about to go home in a couple months. And I was just like, yeah, well, I mean, that'd be cool. But to me, in my head at the time, I was like, you don't just start like an organization like that. Like, I didn't know how organizations worked or anything. Right. So that was a flashback So while I'm at BYU Hawaii, it's like that conversation replays in my head. It's like I see the situation and everything. And I just had this strong feeling that like, that's what you should do. And I was like, well, it kind of works out, because instead of just helping, high school kids in Molokai realize that they have potential, I'm actually going to somewhere where it might be more needed. Somewhere that someone actually wants me, because like
there's a problem.
This guy he had asked me to come back. There was a problem. He had asked me to come back and help him. And I just like, when that conversation replayed in my head, I just had this really, really strong feeling that like, your entire life, pretty much since I was however old, when they built the houses and Kamana'o's family moved in next door, it's like your entire life you have gotten close to Polynesians, particularly Tongans, most recently, especially through the mission. You speak the language really well. You're passionate, like you have a knowledge, a passion, and an ability to kind of do all this stuff in Tonga. And if you don't go back to Tonga, all of those gifts that I've given you will be wasted. It's like, you could go be a teacher in Molokai. That'd be cool. That's fine. That's an honorable profession. But if you go do that, I don't know how many Tongans are Molokai. I don't know if I would have kept my Tongan. But the feeling was, if you go and be a teacher somewhere in Hawaii, that's good. You'll help some people. You'll do some good. But everything that you've experienced throughout your life and all these different, I guess, passions and abilities that you now have will be wasted.
Right.
And so that hit me like really seriously. And I was like, oh, dang. Like, okay. I didn't plan on going back to Tonga, but I felt like
you needed to, yeah. Or,
that's what I was supposed to do. Like, that's
calling you back.
To me, I took it kind of as a divine sort of thing. Like, I felt like that's what God wanted me to do. Right. So I was like, well, first of all, like, what am I gonna do? How do you even start a Boy Scout program? How am I gonna make money to survive? I didn't know anything. This is my first semester in college, and so I spent the rest of my about 2.5, 3 years at BYU Hawaii. I'm gradually putting together this idea, this program, to whereas I was gonna go back to Tonga, start this youth organization similar to the Boy Scouts, but more focused on their needs, and have a tourism business to support myself, but also support the program.
Right.
And so there was I'm probably talking too much already, but there's this series of miraculous events that actually put me back there. I ended up back in Tonga in 2016. I went back there for an internship for 6 months in 2015, doing like my market research, and I went and sought out that guy who I'd originally had that conversation with, and he kind of pushed me to meet the governor at the time, who was Lord Fulivai. And then I came back, and then when I moved back there in 2016, I lived there about 2 years straight, working on these projects. I had developed a big relationship with the governor. The first time I walked into the governor's office, I set up an appointment, and it's not that hard in Wawau. It's not like trying to see the governor of Utah or anything. Like, not to say he's any less important, right. But just smaller population, bit easier to network and stuff like that. So I walked into the governor's office. I had typed up like a little summary. I was like, hey, your friend. So he was actually friends with the guy who originally asked me to come back to. I was like, hey, your friend asked me to come back and help him with this stuff. Pretty much here's a summary of the types of things I want to do. Focused on addressing these issues that we've seen with the young men, particularly the youth in general, but particularly the young men. Yeah. And he said to me, like, he was just like, he leaned back and his eyes got big, and he was just like, I prayed for someone like you this morning. Like, I prayed that someone like you would show up or come, and here you are. He's like, I'm amazed. And I was like, yeah. I was just like, to me, like, everything had been so miraculous. I felt like for me that it was just like, yeah, whatever. Just another thing, yeah. It was just, so yeah, I was back in Tonga. We were working on stuff. The governor, after, I developed a relationship with him over the 6 months I was there in 2015. And then when I left, he was like, hey, look, I know, you're going to be gone. You'll probably at the time I wasn't married. He's like, you might find a wife. You might not ever come back, but I just want you to know, like, I appreciated you being here. And I was like, nah, I'm going to come back. Like, This is what I'm doing. And he's like, yeah, I know you think you're gonna come back. And he was just older and wiser. And when we're young, we think so many things, but our plans can change every month, right? So yeah, I graduated, or I finished my classes at BYU Hawaii, and then I didn't have any money really to go back. I had some money saved up, but it would have been like as much as the plane ticket.
Yeah.
But I had someone contacted me about helping them start their own business down there, and so it was just like out of the blue. So he flew me down there, and I didn't tell anyone I was coming. I didn't tell anyone I was coming back. And I was walking down the street like 2 days after getting back there, and the governor's vehicle drove up past me, and then he's just kind of like, you see him go like, kind of like the double take, and he flipped around. He's like, get in. And so I jumped in. He's like, you're back. And I was like, yeah. So we went and visited the guy who originally asked me to come back, and then we started working on that youth project.
Dang, that's crazy.
Yeah.
So, for you, I guess, was that an easy switch to go from what you did with what your major was before, and then getting into? Well, I guess you kind of covered that already. It was an easy switch because
changing majors, I wanted to, and I loved my degree.
Yeah.
Like, it was awesome. All of my professors were very knowledgeable, very. They were all very different.
Yeah.
I had a Tongan professor, an anthropology teacher, Dr. David Okaili. He's the man. I had my voyaging captain was Kamo'ai Wak. He's got his, I think, PhD in Hawaiian. So he was a big, he helped me understand a lot more about Hawaiian language and stuff. And it's just like, they were all very different individuals, but they all had a lot of strong suits that really, really developed me. And help me understand things. So yeah, like going from education was cool, but the education department was like, you're gonna be a teacher, have fun. But these guys, they were all very invested in their communities and in their culture and in their history, and they instilled in me the importance of so many things that I probably couldn't. We could spend hours talking about.
Gotcha. When you the first time you went to Tonga, what did you think of the food? Was there a favorite food that you got, or was there food that made you sick as well?
Let's see, favorite food. First time I went there was like, we were a bunch of little palangi kids, so they would like try to feed us palangi food.
Right.
So they'd make like little sandwiches with like, like a 1/4 inch of butter. It was just like, it was interesting. Like, growing up around Tongans, I had a lot of Tongan food. When I went on a mission, I was really worried about lu, because in Utah, whenever they'd make lu or lau lau with the Hawaiians or whatever, like I didn't like the leaves. I would eat the meat in the ngako or whatever, like it was all good. But like when it came to eating the leaves, it didn't sit well in my stomach. Like I was in Tongan, you say ta'ayanga, right? Yeah. Like I just, but it was interesting because I went from like not really being able to stomach lu. Then when I went on my mission, of course, that was the first thing they fed us, because that's the meal in Tonga. Yeah. And I was like, ugh. But then like a week later, I ate it again, and it was fifisi, like they didn't cook it all the way. And that was the first time I'd experienced that. So I was like, ugh. But then the week after that, like it was probably like a fast Sunday as a missionary, so you haven't eaten. And I just spent the whole day like just craving lu. I was like, man, I just really want some lu. Right? I don't know where this is coming from, right. But so yeah, lu was one that I thought I would struggle with first, but then it became like, it's my favorite. Like I love it. Like it's like I crave it all the time now, especially being back in the States. I'm just like, man.
That's interesting. So when you were in Tonga, you want to talk about how you were given the title, or with the whole process, or you don't even have to go through the whole process, but just in Lord Fulivai giving that to you.
after my relationship with Lord Fulivai developed, he was serving as I said, he was serving as the governor at the time. And he had I knew his previous personal assistant, but she got a better job in Tonga Tapu and she moved, and he needed a personal assistant. And he was like, I want you to come work as my personal assistant. And I was like, I mean, I abhor the idea of an office job, right? I was like, I'm out here training horses to take horseback rides for tours and working with, but I realized, I was like, my goal is, coming back to Tonga, my goal is to help as much as I can. And if he needs, someone in there, then, so I decided to go ahead and kind of intern as his assistant. I guess is what it officially was. And so I had been his assistant, or interned as an assistant, for about a year. When His Majesty King Tupo VI came up to Vava'u, and he was going to celebrate his birthday up there. So usually his birthday celebration is always in Tonga Tapu, but he was doing something new, towards he was going to have it in Vava'u that year, and then the next year he was going to have it in Ha'apai, and then he was going to start to rotate. Yeah, I was like, he starts a vilo. He's going to start to rotate through the islands. So the 2 weeks of his birthday, they had the Wesleyan Sias Tautaina Tonga Sa Utata Siasi Wesleyana Tautaina o Tonga. The Free Wesleyan Church of Tonga, they had their conference, like their I guess what would be like a general conference, Conference Lahi, in Vava'u the previous week, and the king and the royal family were all there for the whole time. And then after the conference, they had the Aho'alo'i, the king's birthday celebrations. And so during all of this, we were all over the place, and it was cool. Like the streets of Vava'u were packed because everybody came for the conference, and the Wesleyana church is huge. And then like everyone also came for, like, all the government people came for the king's birthday, and they had like a military tattoo, which is like a military display, and they had like all these different kinds of celebrations. And one of the last celebrations they had, which is something they have every year in all the islands, is the Royal Agricultural Show. So that's just an opportunity. It kind of reminds me, it's kind of like a resemblance of the old, like, I imagine it's the modern day whakalahi. Whakalahi was a ceremony to honor like the Tu'i Tonga, and I think one of the gods, Hikuleo, maybe, don't quote me on that. But it's kind of like everybody brings their crops, everyone brings their best ufi, everyone brings their best bulu, their best pigs, and it's a show, but it's fun, like, and then a lot of like vendors come with food, so it's kind of like your 4th of July festival that like we have here in Utah. It's kind of like that in Vava'u. So we're at that ag show, and I just I'm just at Fulivai's side at all times. He's in case he's like, oh, go give me this, go give me that, whatever, right? Figure this out. And during this whole 2 weeks period, I had the very humbling opportunity to go and join some of the Maukava, or not Maukava, just Waikava, regular Inukava, with a lot of the Matapule of the king. So a lot of the chiefs, a lot of the talking chiefs are attendant. I guess a better would be attendant chiefs. Up on the kind of the Vava'u's palace grounds, they have their own little fale, and so I was privileged to go in and just sit there and listen to them talk stories, and I was they shared a lot of things with me, and over the course of the 2 weeks I developed a kind of relationship with them, and I think they're all great men. Like, I've had opportunities since then to interact with them, and they're all just very humble, knowledgeable, kind men. And so at the end of the agricultural show, this is near the end of the final week when everything was about to close, Takapu, who is the Nimatapu, or the royal undertaker, for his majesty, for the king, or for the royal family. He came up to Fulivai and told Fulivai, we're going to have a chiefly installation tomorrow for one of the local Matapule Mautofia. Man, my Tongan's getting mixed up here. I need to get back. I need to practice it more. So he's like, hey, we're going to have the ceremony. We're going to give Tu'i Halamaka his name or his title. It's going to be out at Ovaka. The king asked you to come and officiate in the ceremony. And I was like, okay. And I was kind of like listening. I was like, okay, we got something going on tomorrow. And then he's like, and then at the end, he's like, oh. And I think the words he said, and meaning like, oh, bring your man along. Yeah. We're going to give him kakala hingo, or like pretty much we're going to give him a name too. Yeah. And I was just like, I was kind of listening, but I was also like looking around. There was a lot going on. And I was just like, wait, what? Like, and Takapu was like, he smiled at me. He's like, okay, yeah. And then he walked away. And Fully was like, did you hear that? And I was like, yeah, but what'd he say? Like, I was like, they're going to give you a name. And I was just like, like I was very nervous. Like, cause I mean, like the only Pahalangi who I knew had a name was Vaivaola Shamwe. Yeah. And Shamwe's like, he was the president of BYU Hawaii. Granted, I didn't know that he had received his name when he was a missionary. I thought he had gotten it like after, other time, right? But at the time I was like, he's written this book on Tongan language. Like he was a president of BYU Hawaii. He made these documentaries. Like he's done all these many great things. Mm-hmm. And he has a name. Who am I like to get a name? And Fuliva was like, he's like, it's not like it is an honor, but he's like, it's more of a job. Like, he's like, they're giving you this to lock you down here so that you don't go, like so that you're always kind of stuck here. So you always have to do this stuff. And he's like, do you want it or not? And I was like, oh, like I was really hesitant, really nervous. And he was just like, you better take it. Like, I was like, okay. So, I wasn't hesitant saying, oh, I don't want that. Like in any way, it was just like, it's such a rare, responsibility, but as it's honor as well, right, bestowed on someone. And I didn't feel like, my merits really deserved one, right? Come to find out, it's not like you don't get a title because of your merits. You get a title because you have a work to do. And I guess because of the work that I had been doing for the last couple years previous to this, both with the governor and with the youth, this title was just kind of to support me in that work and move it along. So the next morning we jumped on a boat. It was a beautiful stormy day, which is interesting. Like it was just kind of like a moody morning. We went out to the island. They had the ceremony set up. They were all ready for us. The gentleman who received the Tu'i Halamaka title and he's the Matapule Mautofia, who's like he's a Matapule with an estate. So most people who have estates are just nobles or the Haweki. But there are a few attendant chiefs, Matapule, who have estates. And so he's one of them. But he also had a bunch of other Matapule. And then I was kind of put in the circle as well to receive my title. I was kind of worried though, because like I heard of other titles like in Samoa, like back when the Tu'i Tonga had a presence in Samoa and in Fiji, and like even with Shamwe's original title, I won't tell the story, but like I had heard that he had another title that was like kind of like they give you a name that's kind of like inappropriate sometimes, like just it's Tongan sense of humor, right? Like not necessarily inappropriate, but they're just like random things that may make up, you know what I mean? Like so I was kind of nervous. I didn't know I didn't know what my name was gonna be. I didn't know anything. And then when they called it, or they told me right before, so like, because Uhi was the one calling the cups, and Takapu he wasn't orating the ceremony. So Uhi's like, what's his name? Like, so when he calls my name, I know it, so I can fu and accept my cup, right? Accept my kava. And he opens up his notebook and he flips open and he says, "Ngā hawoma whakatokatea oi whakalolo oi hau." And I was just like, that's a lot of words. Like, and I knew what pretty much most of it meant. I didn't really grasp the word whakatokatea. I had heard it, but I didn't necessarily know what it meant.
Yeah.
So they had the ceremony. Uhi gave a beautiful oration. And as a part of the oration, when you receive your cup, you hold it like this, right? And then for the main, so they used to do it, they would have a speech for every single person receiving their title, which could be like 20 people.
Right.
So the ceremony is literally like 12 hours long. They've changed it recently to whereas they have one speech and then everybody takes their kava off of that speech. But you hold the cup and then he gives the speech. And then as a part of the speech, he says, or something along those lines, meaning you are holding the land in your hands, take it unto you and keep it well or take care of it, right? Which it was just everything about it. I wish I had it recorded somewhere, or I might have a part of the recording somewhere. But it was really like I gained a new understanding. Like I'd studied Oau Kava, like the Kava ceremonies before and titles, and I kind of knew basically what it meant. But actually, so that was in my university studies, but actually sitting in it and participating and not only hearing it, but also receiving that charge, that responsibility that he's like, this is your job. Like, it was crazy. It was amazing.
That's cool.
Yeah.
And then also, sorry, in getting that charge, from with the name and the title, can you also talk about the charge or being in Mavao, and then when King Paul, the first, when he gave God or gave the land to Tonga,
yeah.
which is kind of what you're, which reminds me of what you were talking about, like with the charge that they, they were given, and then also with the charge that George, had given God, the country to God.
Yeah. So I guess I love learning more about the Tongan language because it explains so many things. So especially as a missionary, you use the word fuakava a lot, which fuakava translated into English is covenant, pretty much two-way promise. When later, it was probably when I was at university, I kind of learned this because I did a lot of study around kava because I was fascinated by it, and that and voyaging were kind of my two things. I learned, fua. Fua is to hold. Like if you fua tama, you're holding a baby. Fua, whatever, like it's to pick something up to hold on to it. And kava is kava, like the drink, right? So the word fua kava literally means to hold kava. And to me and some of the scholars that I was able to learn from, that referred to that stage when you hold the cup, your fua kava. So when you take kava, when you hold kava, you are making a promise, but it's more than just like a promise, it's a covenant, literally. That goes back to the legend of Kava. Kava's parents sacrificed her for the king. He didn't partake. Instead, there was two plants that grew, one of them Kava and one of them To. But the bitter plant, the bitter cup, became a symbol of that sacrifice. And so when a chief for Kavas, when he makes that covenant, he is remembering the sacrifice that these parents gave everything they had, their little girl, because girls are the favorite in Tongan families, right? Like they're the protected ones. They probably hate it being locked up in the house and not being able to go anywhere on their own, but like they're the valued ones. The boys are like, yeah, go outside and stay in your hut and then go walk the streets. Like, but so like the symbolism in that story that this, you know, these parents sacrificed their only daughter for this king just is kind of like, to me, I compare it to like Abraham sacrificing Isaac for God, right? It's that kind of relationship. And so that sacrifice, you know, became a symbol of this relationship between the people and land and the Tonga at the time, or the king and the nobles and stuff. So when you make that covenant, you are promising to take care of the fonua, but fonua is not just like the dirt or the rocks or the land, but the fonua is the land and everything on it, right? So Vava'u is a very significant place. I think, well, I mean, Tonga Tapu, also known as Tonga Eiki, is known as Tonga Eiki because it's kind of like the Eiki place, the royal place or the chief's place, right? So a lot of very, very significant things happened in Tonga Eiki, particularly in ancient Tongan history. But in modern Tongan history, a lot of very, very significant things happened in Vava'u. Mm-hmm. One of those being the Tuku Fonua, which is, for anyone who doesn't know this, there was a debate kind of among the chiefs like at the time. So this is during the age of colonization. You know, Europeans who, you know, finally made it off their own coast 1,000 years after Polynesians had already found everything. They made it all the way around to the Pacific and they were like, yeah, this is mine now, whatever. Like, so in the north, you had Samoa was making alliances with Germany and England, or no, England wasn't involved yet. Fiji was very like alliances or being taken over, whichever word you want to use, right? Fiji was, you know, heavy British influence there. Also in New Zealand, you know, you have the British there. You have the French over to the east in Tahiti and, you know, Marquesas and all of what is now French Polynesia. And then you have the Americans, you know, overthrowing people in Hawaii, right? And so there's kind of all of this going on, not all at the same time, but in that age, like people are making alliances. People are, you know, pretty much saying which of these superpowers, which of these Western superpowers are we going to ally ourselves with? You know, as legend says, or the story goes, during all of this conversation, Tupo Uluraki, which is so his original, well, his king name before becoming Tupo was Taufa'ahau. And then he took the name George Tupo when he converted to Christianity. But as a Christian, he picked up dirt off the floor in the Bowono, which is the fale they were in, which is a giant hall in kind of downtown Neafu area. So he picked up the dirt and he held it up in the air. And he pretty much said a prayer where he gave his land, his fonua, but by fonua, it's people, animals, everything on it, right? Ocean too. Yep. He gave that all to God. He's like, we're not going to ally ourselves with anybody. We're just going to ally ourselves with God. And I guess that's kind of where most Tongans like to credit the standing monarchy, is because instead of being taken over by another country, where Tonga was essentially taken over by Christianity, or was given to God and very, very strongly or heavily converted to Christianity.
Right.
So that, I mean, that's kind of, it's the same in this. I mean, people might dispute me on this. These are my own thoughts. There's no book that I read this in, but I feel like a lot of Tongan values very much are intertwined with Christian values. Mm-hmm. The Tongan values, like, you know, the kave kola, the 4 pillars of Tongan society, or there's some people, there's 5, depending on who you talk to. Those existed pre-Christianity.
Interesting, yeah.
Okay, they're not a Christian thing. But it's also like, even in the legends, it's kind of interesting. Like it's not hard to see why maybe a lot of people adopted Christianity. Again, like the king was Christian, and if you wanted to be cool with the king, you'd probably adopt his religion too. Like, I'm not saying that it was all wholly benevolent. Like, I do believe that Tau Fa'ahao's conversion was very like true. What's the word? Like loto mo'oni, like I don't know. Like sincere, right? So I think he was a very sincere convert to Christianity. Not saying that the whole country was, but it doesn't surprise me that it would be, because like those, for example, like the term bitter cup, that's a biblical term. Yeah. Like when Christ went to the Garden of Gethsemane, you know, he prayed that he wouldn't partake of the bitter cup. But then in the kava ceremony, it's, and like I said before, like and again, this might be because there's been generations where, you know, we don't know exactly what the legend is. Maybe there's older ones that are darker, because there's a lot of dark legends back then. But like the relationship between the Tu'i Tonga and the people is kind of that almost similar relationship that Abraham was supposed to have towards God, right? The like I said, the kavegola, they're very kind of Christian values, this sharing what you have, right. This being, you know, loyal and dedicated to your leadership or to God in that case. So to the king, and so in one sense, but to God in another, in the Christian sense. Like working together, kind of like, you know, when people talk about in Tonga, they call it the Nofotui. You hear like the Bible scholars kind of talk about that, or like this age when Christ will reign and everyone will share everything and work together, is similar to like the Tongan kind of, you know, we all share what we have, right, kind of thing. Even the origin of Tu'i Tonga is, and again, this is like a couple people share this sentiment, but the story of Aho Etu is the first Tu'i Tonga. That story pretty much goes, there was a young man, he was born to a woman who had a child with God, which Christ was born to Mary, a virgin who was conceived through the Holy Ghost, right? So right. Similarity there. When the man became of age, he wanted to find out who his father was. His mom told him, go climb that tree. When Christ became of age, he went and fasted in the wilderness for 40 days and 40 nights. And then he went up on the Mount of Transfiguration, right? Like kind of going up to this higher level. Yeah. On the Mount of Transfiguration, Christ met God. In the top of this toa tree, Aho Etu met Tangaloa, his father, right? God, pretty much the highest God. So Aho Etu in the story, he goes up there and he's a favorite, and then his brothers get jealous and then they kill him. They ditch his body. When Aho Etu Tangaloa figures out what happened, has his brothers gather the pieces of his body and they put it in a kumete and they kind of cover it with leaves, or they pretty much bury it, and then he is resurrected whole. Then he goes from there and he comes back down to earth, comes back down to Tonga, and he reigns as the king. And it's kind of like, well, in the, you know, the story of Christ, you know, Christ goes to the Mount of Transfiguration, realizes his destiny, depending on who you ask or what people think happened there. He comes down, you know, a lot of people love him. His brethren, the Jews, hate him. They kill him. They put him in a grave. A few days later, he's resurrected. And then he's going to come back to earth to reign as king, kind of thing. Like there's just a lot of similarities. Right. Or you can make similarities. I mean, maybe I'm just making these similarities. You know, we always see what we want to see, right? But like, to me, it's not hard to see why Tongans kind of adapted Christianity so well, is because a lot of the legend or cultures or moral aspects, somewhat, I mean, there was still baby sacrificing, and there was still, you know, self-mutilation. There was still tyranny and all the, you know, everything that mankind does, which is horrible. But in a lot of aspects of Tongan culture, they do transition well over to Christianity. Right. So, but that's, I mean, going back to that kava kind of ceremony, that two-way, like when we take kava and it's a promise to kind of support the king by taking care of the land, it plays very well into that kind of covenant or that promise or that gifting that Tupo Uluwaki did when he gave the land to God, because he's like, I'm going to give you the land, but you're going to take care of the land.
Right.
That's that same kind of relationship there. So, yeah.
Man,
Yeah.
that's crazy. But shoot, I could just sit here and, you know what I mean,
Yeah,
listen to
man,
these
no.
stories or talk stories. And I just wanted to bring up just this past week on social media, I had mentioned, or I made a video, or made a post. I posted that in just getting to know you, I remember telling you that, man, I feel like you're more Tongan than me. And then I don't know if you remember this, but that night you told me like you're the Tongan that you're supposed to be.
Yeah.
And so for me, I was like, man, I didn't think nothing of it that night, but just the more I kept thinking about it, and it just kept coming back to my mind, and I was like, man, that really, at this point, or for my family, for myself, for my peoples, or that I'm the Tongan that I'm supposed to be.
No, exactly.
And that whether I speak Tongan or don't speak Tongan, I'm still Tongan, or what I mean, like I'm still just like you said,
you're the Tongan you're supposed to be.
Yeah.
No.
And so I am, just really appreciative of that. But just in wrapping this up, just to get to know you a little bit more, I just have a few questions, rapid fire questions, and whatever, like the first thing that comes to your mind, just go ahead and go ahead and share
Hold
that.
on, let me get ready first.
So, what takes up too much of your time?
Right now, daydreaming. I want to be back in Tonga. We'll be back soon though.
Yeah. What do you wish you knew more about?
The history of the world. There's a lot of unwritten history out there. It'd be great to know what really happened.
Yeah. What inspires you? What or who inspires you?
Oh, that's a difficult one. I mean, stories inspire me.
Yeah.
Just there's a lot of really good stories out there, and I guess a lot of people inspire me, but what inspires me is how most great men come from nothing sometimes.
Right.
But it's like what inspires me is that we all have the potential for greatness within us. And I see that. I try to see that in everybody. I'm not perfect. But yeah, I guess that would be it.
Awesome. What are some things you had to unlearn?
Racism. I mean, being married, my wife is very politically aware.
Okay.
And it's not like I've never intentionally discriminated against someone based on their race. Growing up in Utah, my dad is a landscaper. We were around Hispanics all the time. I loved them. I love the food. I love the culture. Growing up around Polynesians, I love them. But at the same time, I've come to learn and realize that everybody kind of, and it depends on what definition of racism you use. Right. But if you're going biased based on someone's, everybody's kind of discriminatory. Everyone thinks something of someone else. And I realized I have been raised with these certain, not that my parents raised me with it, but just in the culture abroad, I guess there's certain mindsets. And it's not I've never hated anyone based on their race. Right. But it's just kind of unlearning those, I guess, microaggressions is what you'd call them, or trying to, so.
That's cool. What's your favorite book?
That's a hard one. There's a lot. So I'll go with my childhood book. Yeah. There's a book called Cassidy. It's like a historical novel of Butch Cassidy. Okay, yeah. Who was a Mormon. The Sundance Kid? Yeah, and Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. That was his partner. Yeah, okay. Yeah, his partner in crime. But there's a lot of books I love now. I really love William Mariner's account of Tonga, because Toki Okamea, yeah. But I mean, as an adult, there's so many I can't choose. But when I was a kid, I loved that Cassidy book. Yeah. This is like a classic cowboy story.
What's the luckiest thing that's happened to you?
So many to choose from. I'm gonna just go with the safe answer and say meeting my wife.
Good answer. Shout out to the wifey for letting him letting you come out tonight. What's special about the place you grew up?
I guess what I appreciate most about where I came from in Provo, Utah, like down by the lake, around no one perfect, of course, but I like when I got older, people from out of state or other places would be like, Utah, like Utah Mormons this or so judgmental or so, and I was just like, what are you talking about? Like I've never experienced that. And then I go like as I expand, like met people from other parts of Utah, I was like, oh, that's what you're talking about.
Yeah.
But I just appreciate like I just grew up in a good community where people generally loved each other and respected each other, regardless of whatever was going on. You know, where you're from, who you are, how much money you got, what color your skin is, kind of thing.
What have you only recently formed an opinion about?
This is terrible. Kind of like more politics stuff.
Yeah.
Like I just dislike politics in general. But with everything that's kind of going on, I guess more like closer answer, like President Trump. Like I was in Tonga when he was elected. I was gone for most of everything. But like being back here in America and kind of seeing it, I've really formed an opinion on all of that now, I guess.
What song will guarantee to make you dance?
Ooh. I don't know, like a lot of Mark Ronson, like Valerie or what's that one that I can't remember the name. It's gonna kill me.
No worries.
Yeah. Some of Mark Ronson stuff, yeah.
Well, what hobby would you get into if money and time weren't an issue?
I really want to get back in. I mean, I've done this before. I learned to train horses and riding horses.
Oh, nice.
But I haven't done it recently because money and time, right?
Yeah.
So getting more into just horsemanship and then maybe more into shooting. I enjoy marksmanship, archery maybe, kind of thing.
What could you give a 40-minute presentation on with no preparation?
Tongan stuff in Vavao.
Yeah.
Voyaging.
And when people come to you for help, what do they usually need help with?
Moving stuff. I guess I have a truck.
Yeah. What's something you think everyone should do at least once in their life?
I think everybody should leave where they came from.
Yeah.
And just go live with a different kind of people for a significant period of time. Like don't go on vacation to Thailand, but like
stay there for a couple months.
Stay there for a while. Maybe learn a language. Just learn to appreciate another culture.
Awesome.
I think.
Which of your scars has the best story behind it?
I got some scars on my chest that have a story behind them.
What happened? You want to share it?
Nah, I don't want to share. Maybe not a good story, but a very significant story.
Okay. What helps you live in the moment?
Fresh air and music.
And finally, last question. If you could give back to your village, how or what would you do?
Which one?
Up to you, both. You can do both. Go Provo and then go to... if you're not to Tonga.
I think Provo, to give back, I would really love to... There's a lot of great technology out there when it comes to environmental stuff, like waste disposal. I would love to create a better way of generating energy and food and disposing of waste in Utah. I would do that in Tonga as well, but Utah has kind of like got this set system that I would really like to change, whereas Tonga is pretty much free for all. And then in Tonga, one of my dreams, when I went back to Tonga to do the Boy Scout program, I realized that the youth there don't just need some program once a week. They need somewhere where they can go every day of the year. Because there's no youth centers, there's not a lot of after school activities, there's no arcades, there's nothing like for a bored kid to do.
Maybe that's why the rate,
yeah, exactly. Idle hands.
Yeah.
So in Vava'u, have a goal, a dream, something I'm not currently like actively working towards it. It was something I was working toward, but I want to work towards it is just creating a kind of like a youth center for the kids of Vavao. Just lift weightlifting stuff, right. Ping pong tables, a TV, like maybe not video games, but like classes. You take a pottery class, take an art class, take a entrepreneurial class. Or just it's just a youth center where they can pretty much go there and either just play around and have fun or go there and learn something and kind of better themselves in that way. But,
cool, man. That's awesome. And it's cool that you always, think of Tonga, when you're asking, because the first thing you said was like, which village, and I already knew, like, you're already thinking not only Provo, but also.
No, Tonga's home.
Yeah.
I mean, I can't really avoid it now. Like I have a title, I have a responsibility. I accepted a job. So even though we're up here while my wife's going, finishing her schooling, the goal is always to go back. That's probably where I will die and be buried, I guess. But
that's awesome. Well, again, thank you for tuning in to another episode of the Village Made podcast. Can I ask you to take us out in Tongan? Because my Tongan is not that good.
Yo! Malo lava mai, malo musi whanongo ki tau. Whanki po lawe koni, hofalahi atu.
Amen.
Amen.